getting some horrible, parasite, after surviving this, and hopefully, God willing, not getting sick with COVID. But they were pretty serious about it. And even if we don't go there, you'll hopefully see something on that. And as I mentioned before, a couple of weeks ago, I am working now on getting a Zoom discussion call with Max Fried, so that we can talk a little bit about Jews and baseball.
Well, how cool would that be?
So we started that yesterday, trying to set that up. So I'm pretty sure, the good thing is that because we're going to do it by Zoom, you can be anywhere to do it. So hopefully we'll find a day. And
does he still live out here in the off season?
I believe so. I think he does. I think so the question is, does he have his own? I mean, he can afford to have his own place.
Do you think so?
He's but he's only like 25 or 24, 25, 26 or something. So he might, I don't know, maybe, I don't know that he lives with his family when he's in town. But anyways, we're working on it. So Max Fried, if you're listening to this, we are gonna get you a time to talk about Judaism and what it's like to be a Jewish baseball star in 2020. And he definitely was a star. If you watched any of the Atlanta Braves Dodger games, you know what I'm talking about. So anyways, we're working on that too. So with that, I thought we'd jump into our Parsha tonight, Vayera, which we actually looked at a couple weeks ago for Rosh Hashanah. It's the Torah portion that we read, the first part of it, or not the first part of it. We looked at chapter 21 before Rosh Hashanah, the Wednesday before. It's the Torah portion that we read, and because Rosh Hashanah fell on a weekend, and we read that Torah portion, and we looked at the first part of the story, and then the Akedah we read at the class, and we studied that on the day of Rosh Hashanah, the second day. So we had a chance to look at chapters 21 and 22. So I thought today we kind of focus on the first three chapters 18, 19, and 20. We'll read 21 and 22. But last month, we really kind of dove in and read, or a month and a half ago, we really dove in and kind of read the last two chapters. So we'll focus on the chapters we didn't read, which are very important chapters. I mentioned last week, today we're going to read the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which is really only one chapter, but it's a fascinating chapter, and we'll have a chance to look at it a little bit more in depth, because again, sometimes we're just trying to get through, and there's so much in this portion, in these 5 chapters, that we sometimes don't have time to look at everything that's going on. So we'll look at the first part, which is again, compared to the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, not the most famous part or the most influential part on Judaism, but the Sodom and Gomorrah story is pretty important for Western civilization. There are a lot of references to Sodom in literature and in poetry and culture and art. So it's a pretty important story, and we'll take a look at it. We'll take a look at it now. So anybody have any questions or comments or anything from last week that I don't want to again, for those who weren't here last week, to give you the proper context, we were introduced to Abraham and Sarah, to Avram and Sarai. They, at this point, again, where we left off, we just had the actually, we didn't finish last week's portion. I just looked at it. We didn't finish chapter 17. This was the part about Ishmael, and we didn't actually get to it. We were maybe we read it, but we kind of read it fast, I think. But this is the part of Abraham and Sarai's story where we get introduced to Hagar, and to Ishmael, to the first son that Abraham has. But as we mentioned, it's really like the third almost son that he has, in the sense that Isaac is his like chosen son, because he has first Lot, his nephew, then he has Eliezer, his assistant, his chief steward, if you will. Then he has Ishmael, and then finally he'll have Isaac. So he goes through a series of sons, really, and it is there in the text for us to be kind of confronted with the fact that Abraham, by the time he has Isaac, he has he's had these almost sons that I mean, and Ishmael is of course his own flesh and blood, but he's had these children that for various reasons weren't the child that would be the inheritor. So what we left off here with Ishmael is that Ishmael is born to Hagar after Sarai is jealous of the fact that Hagar got pregnant. And the last part of last week's portion in chapter 17 is that Abraham is told to circumcise his family, and that will now include obviously this young Ishmael. And the commandment is, you shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and that shall be a sign. And throughout the generations, every male shall be circumcised at the age of 8 days. Now, many people say that this is the first and maybe only commandment in the book of Genesis, which again is incumbent on Jews to do, Jewish males to do. At the end of the circumcision, it says Sarai shall be called Sarah. Her name is changed just like her name, like his name is changed. And it finishes with this: I will bless her indeed. I will give you a son by her. I will bless her that she shall give rise to nations. Rulers of people shall issue from her. Abraham threw himself on his face and laughed. And he said to himself, can a child be born to a man 100 years old? Or can Sarah bear a child at 90? So in this story, Abraham laughs and says to God, maybe Ishmael can find your favor. And God said, no, Sarah's going to have a baby, and my covenant will be through that child. And God says, but Ishmael, I will bless him. I will make him fertile and numerous. He shall be a father of 12 chiefs, right? Just like Jacob will have 12 sons, Ishmael will have 12 sons. That's pretty big. And it says, the last words are, Abraham took his son Ishmael and all his homeborn slaves and all those he had bought, every male in his household, and he circumcised them. Abraham was 99 years old when he circumcised the flesh of his foreskin. And his son Ishmael was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. And thus Abraham and his son Ishmael were circumcised on that very day. Which is why in some Muslim countries, a child isn't circumcised at 8 days old, but as a young man, as a rite of passage, as a puberty ritual. And as I oftentimes tell kids at their bar mitzvahs, aren't you glad you're Jewish? Because
Yes.
that could be your bar mitzvah. And I don't care how many fountain pens and gifts they give you, gift certificates. That I don't want to have when I'm 13. So yeah. And again, not every Muslim civil different culture within the Islamic world does that, but there are some that do. Gosh, I remember seeing a picture of it in National Geographic when I was probably maybe that age. Never forgot that picture of that kid sitting under I remember sitting under a umbrella kind of thing. And was like, whoa, it's not a ritual I want to be a part of.
Rabbi, is something like this in the Quran then?
Interestingly, I don't believe circumcision is actually mentioned in the Quran. Like I don't think the Quran says that you have to literally be circumcised. Yeah, I'm looking it up right now. It is not mentioned explicitly. And it is done it is mentioned in other Islamic texts, and it is its interpretation is that it can be done, and more importantly, or more relevantly, there's also a question whether it's supposed to be done on women, which there are arguments within the Islamic world whether it's forbidden, encouraged, or kind of in between. So yeah, it is performed in some Islamic countries. Not every Islamic country, but it is performed in some Islamic countries, female circumcision. It's interesting because then it's called genital mutilation. But I look, some of it has to do with the cultures of the practices of the people before they became Muslim. Because remember, a lot of these civilizations became Muslim after they were already, had hundreds of years of development as a pagan civilization that was also like a national identity, and they had their own cultures, their own cultural traditions. So they don't. Not every Islamic group does it, but it is important in this story. And again, as we begin this week's portion, Vayera, in chapter 18, it says that the Lord appeared to him, and again, that's what the word Vayera means, and he appeared, which is God, and he appeared by the terebinths of Mamre. And as we said, alon is a oak tree, and alone or alonim are oaks. So that's why we have Camp Alonim, which means the oaks, Camp of the Oaks out in Simi Valley. So Alone Mamre is the oak grove called Mamre, the oaks of Mamre, which is again usually translated in biblical texts, or sometimes is the terebinths, which is kind of like the King James word for oak grove. And it says that Avram was sitting at the entrance of the tent as the day grew hot. Looking up as he saw three men standing near him, as soon as he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to greet them, and bowing to the ground, he said, "My lords, if it please you, do not go past your servant." So interestingly, here Abraham sees these people. He sees them as people, but he seems to know that they're not just people, or it's possible he sees that they're not people, because he bows low and he greets them like royalty. Now, first of all, this demonstrates Abraham's the tradition and value he had of what we call hachnasat orachim, of welcoming guests, right? And so he loves to take care of people when they come to his tent. But the rabbis interpret from this Torah portion another really important mitzvah, which is that God and the angels who are here, it seems like God and maybe two angels there with him. Maybe it's the three people. That God is doing an act of we call Bikur Cholim, another mitzvah, which is visiting the sick. So Avraham is doing the mitzvah of welcoming in guests. God is doing the mitzvah of Bikur Cholim, of visiting the sick. And of course, we learn here that even God visits the sick. So when we do it, we're acting in God's way because God visits the sick. And what's Abraham doing? He's recovering from his circumcision. So here's God coming to him and visiting him while he's recovering, which again, maybe would have made bowing to the ground kind of painful, or maybe he doubled over in pain as he was running to greet them. But the point is that there's a tradition that he's actually recuperating. So he says, "Let a little water be brought, bathe your feet, and recline under the tree. Let me fetch a morsel of bread that you may refresh yourselves. Then go on, seeing that you have come your servant's way." They replied, "Do as you have said." So again, he keeps saying, let me be your servant. And it says that Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said to her, "Quick, 3 seahs of choice flour, knead and make cakes." So he's really good at delegating part of it to his wife. Now, by the way, just so you think that he's just like a normal guy telling his wife to cook something, no, he does something too. Abraham ran to the herd, took a calf, tender and choice, and gave it to a servant boy who hastened to prepare it. So he delegates or does a little bit of the work of picking out a nice piece of meat for it. I don't, a calf is definitely maybe one translation of it, but it's a young cow. So, it doesn't have to necessarily be a calf, but a young cow. And they prepare it. And he also prepares something himself, it says. He took curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them. And he waited on them under the tree as they ate. So again, people like to point out, this seems strange. Abraham just prepared a meal with milk and meat together. What's going on here? Didn't he know about kashrut? So it is something that people have pointed out for a long time. Why is he giving them milk and meat? Well, he gives them the milk and then he gives them the meat later, which you can have milk and then wait a little bit and have meat. But that's one interpretation, that they didn't necessarily eat it in the same moment. Another interpretation is he didn't know the laws of kashrut, and so wasn't breaking a law he didn't have yet. Some people don't like that. They don't like that idea that Abraham didn't know the Torah. They like the idea that Abraham knew the Torah, Isaac and Jacob, that when Moses gets the Torah for everybody else, this is re-revealing the Torah that always existed. So that's something that we've read it in the Midrash, this idea that the patriarchs always knew the Torah. So the rabbis really didn't like the idea that Abraham would violate a law. So they have an interesting interpretation here that the words chema vechalav, which is translated as curds and milk, could also be translated as butter and fat, or some type of non-milk, like schmaltz kind of thing that they would eat that wasn't necessarily prepared from milk. There's another possibility, which is that the prohibition against milk and meat, eating them together, wasn't necessarily always literally any type of milk and any type of meat. That literally the prohibition against boiling a kid in its mother's milk, which is what the Torah says, is one thing in particular, taking a kid or a goat and boiling it in its own mother's milk, which was something specifically that the Canaanite local population did, which the Jews found to be disgusting, that someone would have so little disregard for life and almost humiliate and make a mockery of life to boil a goat in its own mother's milk. They found that offensive. I think most of us would find that offensive, even if we eat meat. Like most of us who eat meat, there's like things we won't do. For most people, there's like a line in the sand. We say, I won't do that. Whatever it is. I mean, everybody's got their own thing. You don't need to tell me what your thing is. But my thing is way over there where I'm not eating meat. But most people who eat meat say, I won't do that. But the rabbis point out that, maybe he didn't really eat milk and meat together at the same time. We really don't like that idea that he didn't know, or that Abraham didn't live under the Torah. I don't like that idea. So they generally go with that kind of interpretation. There's another issue too, which is when it says he waited on them under the tree as they ate. They didn't really eat it. They're angels. They're God. God and the angels don't eat. They never really ate it. So he didn't really give them anything to eat because they don't eat. It's all kind of like an act because they don't eat. Okay, so the story continues. They said to him, "Where is your wife Sarah?" And he replied, "There in the tent." Then one said, I will return to you next year, and your wife Sarah will have a son. Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. Sarah had stopped having the periods of women, which in Hebrew is orach kanashim. That she stopped having the word can be translated as the monthly visitor, or not the monthly visitor, the visitor of women, what women, the visit of woman, if you will. Now, what's interesting about this is that we just read in the previous chapter that Abraham laughed when he was told he was going to have a kid. Here, the story is like a different version of the same story. So again, this is one of the areas where people say, there's two different authors, there's two different versions of this story. One where Abraham laughed and one where Sarah laughed. Well, the one where Sarah laughs is interesting because, first of all, it's angels that tell him and not God. Tell her or tell them. And here Sarah is like caught. Let's watch. And Sarah laughed to herself, saying, now that I'm withered, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old? Then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I in truth bear a child as old as I am? So Sarah gets called out on this. In this version, in this story, Sarah is challenged by God. Is anything too wondrous for the Lord? I will return to you at the same time next year. Same season, right? And Sarah shall have a son. And Sarah lied, saying, I did not laugh, for she was frightened. But he replied, meaning God, you did laugh. So what's so strange about that story is that, Sarah gets called out by God. She lies. Says she lies. We know she lies. Says that she lied. And she gets called out. And it actually, interestingly, says why she lied. The Torah actually says that she was afraid. Now, of course, this is all connected to his name, Isaac, right? Laughing. His father laughs. His mother laughs. There's a few other times, as we saw already in chapter 21 and 22, where there's the question of laughing with attended to Isaac about joking or playing a game on him. Any questions or comments about this so far, the Sarah laughed business? Some people have pointed out that this is a really interesting story about the role of women in the Bible. Because, here you have God involved in this discussion between Abraham and Sarah. We already heard she's 90, so it's not ridiculous for her to have said it. Am I too old? I don't menstruate anymore. This is kind of crazy. I was going to say, you wouldn't normally say that a 90-year-old lady could have a child, but I don't know. Joyce is on the line right now, so I would say, not that she's going to, but you'd almost believe that could happen sometimes. I don't know. She's so vivacious and alive, It's almost like, hey, you know something? You never know. But I will tell you, they're not making fun of Sarah here. They're talking about something really serious. They really are, which is that she isn't supposed to have a child at the age she is. So this is a miracle.
Now, it seems like she was not only frightened, but she must have been self-conscious.
Yeah.
And disbelieving.
Yeah. Now, here's a really interesting thing that we may have pointed this out before. it doesn't matter. You have to, when you read this section, you must point this out, because this gets a little bit more to actually what Joyce and Lee did for so much of their lives, which is work on bringing couples together. And the rabbis point out in this in the commentary on this section, a very interesting thing that happens and what isn't said. And just focus with me here for a second. When Sarah laughs, she says to herself, by the way, so we don't know whether she says it out loud even, by the way. It says bekir ba, that she says it into herself. That's what the word bekir ba means. Now, she could have laughed and yeah, like that, but it doesn't matter because God knows what you're thinking. So she didn't have to say it out loud, but she thought it. And what does she say? Now that I'm with her, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's the interesting thing. God turns around to Abraham. He doesn't confront Sarah right away, which is already kind of unusual. But so they're in the same area. They're in the same room. They're in the same area, general vicinity. She's behind the tent, whatever. God says to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I in truth bear a child as old as I am, right? As old as I am, right? Now, what's missing from that? What's missing from what God said to Abraham?
Abraham doesn't answer at all. His response,
Well, that's true.
not there.
Abraham doesn't say that anything. But look at what Sarah did in the first place. Look what Sarah said. I am withered with my husband. Am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old? When God repeats it to Abraham, he said, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I in truth bear a child old as I am? God didn't repeat what Sarah said.
Right.
He edited it. I mean,
from enjoyment to a child.
Not just that. Sarah not only said, I can't have children, but that my husband can't fulfill me. Am I to have enjoyment with my husband's soul? She put Abraham down. When God confronted Sarah, he didn't say, and told Abraham that Sarah did it. He didn't say, hey, did you know that Sarah laughed at you and said that you can't perform anymore? God didn't say that. God said Sarah said she couldn't have a child and left it at that. And the rabbis point out that this isn't an accident. God did something here very important. And it's really an important value, which the rabbis noticed, because God omitted that. God chose not to say the whole thing. God left that part out.
Mm-hmm.
And they point out that God does something here which we also try to emulate, which is we try to create shalom bayit. We try to create peace between a couple and in a family. We don't make the problems worse. Now, forget the fact that, again, in your cases, you're trying to do healing. But more importantly, every one of us, you don't have to be a healer or a therapist. You don't have to be you don't have to have a master's in social work to know that in a daily basis, our job is not to cause tension in families.
Mm-hmm.
Our job is to bring families together and to not exacerbate problems. And so God does this. God doesn't say everything. Now, some people point out, well, isn't that kind of like a white lie? Isn't God kind of, omitting the truth? Is that not like a lie? And so the rabbis point out that maybe, but there are times when keeping peace in the house with a family allows for you not to have to say everything. That if it's not necessary, if it's not required for the healing process to confront somebody with, and to confront the couple with all the information, there's no need to do that. There's no need to make a problem worse by giving all the information and not picking and choosing what part of the information can help fix the situation. And so they say, even God does that. even God knows and allows for that kind of balance of saying, yeah, sometimes the truth, telling the whole truth, isn't the bigger mitzvah. Sometimes creating peace in the house is more important than telling the whole truth. Now, again, I'm not encouraging people to lie. I'm not saying the Torah is teaching us that we should all lie. But there is an interesting reminder here, especially for our day, our times, when we oftentimes overshare, that we don't have to make things worse by spilling everything,
Right.
and putting it out on the table. It doesn't.
Especially in a group of people, one must be gentle.
Yeah, and especially when the dynamic is the other person, because think about what Sarah would have felt like if God confronted Abraham with that piece of information in front of Sarah and humiliating everybody. So there's this understanding here, even again, something simple as this one line. The rabbis pointed out thousands of years ago that there's an amazing dynamic that goes on here with communication, with understanding human emotions, with understanding the dynamics of social interaction. All of these things are at play here, and the rabbis pointed out thousands of years ago. That's not something that was written like 50 years ago or 20 years ago. This was written 2,000 years ago. The rabbis noticed that part that was missing, and they wrote this wonderful teaching on it, which is, yeah, maybe sometimes you don't need to say the whole thing, and confront somebody with all the information, at that moment. Is it a white lie? I don't know that it's a white lie, but it's definitely a little omission, and maybe Shalom Bayit is worth more than spilling the whole truth. Anyways, a nice little teaching on this one missing line here. So Sarah is told, going to have a baby, and confronted with this. And it says, the Med set out there and looked down on Sodom, and Abraham walked with them to see them off. So it seems as though like the angels split off from God. I mean, it's kind of hard to figure out what's going on there, because are there two angels and God? Are there three angels and God? We're not really sure what's going on here, but it seems like maybe it's two angels and God, and they appear like three people to Abraham. But the two other angels, which again are called men here, they're not called angels. They go towards Sodom, and Abraham again is there now with God. And God said, I assume again God's saying this internally to God's self, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Since Abraham is to become a great and populous nation, and all the nations of the earth are to bless themselves by him, which again we read last week in Lech Lecha, that we're to be blessed in the name of God. I've singled him out that he may instruct his children and his posterity to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is just and right, in order that the Lord may bring about for Abraham what he promised him. Then the Lord said, the outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin is so grave. So this is the line and the way the story begins, as God tells Abraham what he's going to do, or what he's faced with. And again, this is very reminiscent of what we read 2 weeks ago with the story of Noah, where Noah is told by God, I have to do something with humanity. And Noah says nothing. Now here, God starts off by saying, I got to tell Abraham what I'm doing, because he's going to take care of the world, his children and his posterity. And that line there, this verse, as much as I told you that people always pay attention to the Jews are a blessing, and people will be blessed through us and by us. But I told you that Gentiles will oftentimes come up to me and say, I bless the Jewish people every day, and those kind of things. That's great, and that's wonderful. But there's a really important part of this blessing, this chosenness. And that is that God says with Abraham and his descendants, which is you and me, it's posterity, that we are to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is just and right. That we are people who do la'asot tzedakah u'mishpat, that we do righteousness and justice, or we do what's just and what's lawful, law and order. We do what is right and what's just. Tzedakah is justice, right? Now, what's so impressive about that is that God tells Abraham that your descendants are going to be doing good in the world. And so I'm telling you what I'm about to do because I'm trying to bring justice to the world. And it's going to be your family's job to do this. You need to teach them and know what I'm doing because you're going to be in this world to help make sure that this kind of stuff doesn't happen. And it's weird because already we're seeing that God seems to be transferring some of the work that he's been doing, that God's been doing to us, and specifically to the Jewish people. And when I talked to the master students today, and they talked to me, the professor was asking some questions for the students. Why do Jewish people have such a big impact on the world? I say it's because of these words, and I'm thinking about them because I knew they're in this week's Torah portion. But this idea that the Torah tells us, the Bible tells us that we're here as Jews to make a difference in the world and to help make the world better. Sometimes people find that they're going to do that through medicine or through inventions or through technology. And then there's other people who are going to do it through the law, who are going to do it through trying to make the world a safer and better place. And to do what we need to do to help people live in a safe and fair community. And that's why so many, I honestly believe that so many Jews became legal scholars and justices, and got involved as judges, because we've been teaching our families this for a long time, that we need to be agents of justice in this world. And there are lots of different ways to do it. There aren't as many Jews in law enforcement as there have been in the past, but there have always been Jews involved in law enforcement. But there is this idea that we whatever we do in our world, we're supposed to be God's agents for doing justice and righteousness in this world, doing legal things. I mean, tzedakah is really justice, and mishpat is really law. So, or doing what's I wouldn't say even ethical, but legal. What following the rules. Justice is more, again, helping make sure things are fair and equal and ethical, and making sure that people are protected, that the weak are protected, those kind of things. And mishpat is really kind of the law, making sure that the law is being enforced. So that's what we're supposed to do as Jews. It's our job. And so I literally just talked about it today with the kids from students at Masters. The Lord said, the outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin is so great. I will go down now to see whether they have acted altogether according to the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will take note. If not, notice, I will take note. The assumption is that I got to do something. The men went from there to Sodom. And again, it seems like the men are now with God again as or whatever, the men are on their way, whatever. God is with Abraham, but Abraham now does something that Noah never did. And here's the scene. So the next few verses are this discussion, this dialogue, which is the longest dialogue that we have with Abraham. It's the longest dialogue that we have in the entire Bible with Abraham. Usually it's one phrase answers, one sentence, one word in some cases. Abraham said to God, "Will you sweep away the innocent along with the guilty? What if there should be 50 innocent within the city? Will you then wipe out the place and not forgive it for the sake of the 50 innocent who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to bring death upon the innocent as well as the guilty, so that the innocent and guilty fare alike. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do justly?" So again, this is the way Abraham negotiates with God. He appeals to God's justice. And this seems to be exactly what God wanted. God wanted a person to argue on behalf of the innocent and to say, wait a second, maybe there's good people out there. And this is what Noah doesn't do. Noah never says to God, God, you're wiping out the world. Are there not 50 good people in the whole world? Come on, God, there's got to be somebody good in the world. Maybe we can save them too. Never does it. Because it's this moment that Abraham steps up to be our ancestor. Not Noah, not Adam, but this is what makes Abraham our ancestor, the ancestor of the Jewish people. His courage, his willingness to confront God, and his willingness to risk his own life to defend humanity, all of humanity. And the Lord answered, if I find 50 in the city of Sodom, 50 innocent ones, I'll forgive the whole place for their sake. So Abraham spoke up, saying, I venture to speak to my Lord. I who am but dust and ashes. Very good way to negotiate with God. Be very humble. What if the 50 innocent should lack 5? Will you destroy the whole city for one of 5? And he answered, I will not destroy if I find 45 there. So there's the first negotiation. 45. But he spoke to him again and said, what if 40 should be found there? And he answered, I will not do it for the sake of the 40. And he said, let my Lord not be angry if I go on. What if 30 should be found there? And he answered, I will not do it if I find 30 there. And again, God's kind of given a 4 or 5 word answer. And he said, I venture to speak to my Lord. What if 20 should be found there? And he answered, I will not destroy for the sake of 20. And he said, let not my Lord be angry if I speak but this last time, one more time. What if 10 should be found there? And he answered, I will not destroy it for the sake of the 10. And that's the last word from God, because when the Lord finished speaking to Abraham, he departed and Abraham returned to his place. So Abraham is now left by himself after arguing with God on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Now, is that, Rabbi, is that where minyan?
Yeah, so this is where we get this idea that there's 10 people make up a minyan, make up a community. Because again, this is one of those places where we see 10
good men,
10 good people, right? So if we can get 10 people together, we have a community. We have a kahal, we have a group. And so there's certain things we need a minyan for, right? So to pray, to do certain things, to, obviously the Kaddish is the one that we talk about the most, but there's a lot of things that you can't do unless you have a minyan, prayers that you're supposed to say, Torah readings, things that you're supposed to do when you have a minyan, once you have that minyan. But if if you can get 10 people together, it's not generally just a family. It's generally enough for a few different people from different backgrounds. And really what it tells us is that when you can get 10 people together, they transcend normal. There usually are enough boundaries which are crossed, right, that are transcended in order for people to get together. And so something special happens when 10 people get together and can agree to do something together. There's an energy and there's a commonality of purpose that 10 people have. Again, like what if you're one short? There's discussions about what you do if you only have 9 people. Can you count the Torah? All different. Can you count a minor if there's 9? All different kinds of stuff that are discussed about minions and why, why is it so important to have 10? But again, it really comes from this kind of idea that with 10 people, Sodom and Gomorrah will not be destroyed. Now, of course, not ruining the end of the story for you, we don't get 10 people. We're going to turn now to chapter 19, and you're going to see what happens here. Now, I'm not going to ruin the story for you because you already know what happens with Sodom and Gomorrah. So I'm not going to get into that other than the fact that, don't worry, God doesn't destroy any innocent people. And it doesn't seem like God ever had any intention of destroying any innocent people. But that's not the point. Abraham argues on behalf of them. Now, again, he knows his nephew Lot is living there in the city, but his nephew Lot was not 10 people. He was not just trying to save Lot. He seems to really be genuinely concerned with the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. And remember, we read last week that he goes to battle on behalf of the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah. He actually fights a battle with the kings of the east for these people. So he's already defended them once against an external threat. But as we're about to see, these are not good people. Now, the midrash on this, the legend on this, is much deeper than the Torah, because the Torah doesn't really get into we get enough. We get enough for why these people are bad, but we don't get as much as we get in the midrash. The midrash is much more descriptive of what kinds of horrible things went on there, and it seems like they were basing it on legends and on, horrible examples of things that go on and unfortunately even in the world today. But what's so interesting, of course, is that the word sodomite has become a word in English which has nothing to do, sodomy has nothing to do with what the people of Sodom are really guilty of. Let's take a look. So this is Genesis chapter 19. And, it's interesting because, it's one of those chapters that a lot of people know. They don't know where it comes from. You're seeing the full context of this. This is towards the beginning of Abraham's, journey as a Jew. I mean, he's already 90 at this point, but he's in his 90s, whatever. Just kind of keep in mind that Abraham is, this story, it's important in the larger context of Genesis. And because I said we're going to look at this a little bit in greater detail, there's an interesting way of remembering, not that anyone's ever going to quiz you on it, why Genesis chapter 19 is easy to remember. I'll show you why in a second. All right, so let's take a look at the story. It's a fairly quick story, by the way, in the Bible. Like a lot of stories, you think they're longer, but it's not that long. 2 angels arrived in Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to greet them, and bowing low, his face to the ground, very much like Abraham. He's learned the mitzvah of welcoming guests. He said, "Please, my lords, turn aside to your servant's house to spend the night and bathe your feet. Then you may be on your way early. But they said, no, we will spend the night in the square. So he invites them to his house, but they say, no, we'll stay out here out in the public arena, if you will. But he urged them strongly. So they turned his way and entered his house. So Lot wasn't going to have any of it. He said, no, you got to come with me. Got to come with me. Now, it seems that Lot knew something about the other people that lived in the city of Sodom. He prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread. Yes, that's right. He made a little feast for them with matzah. Matzah. Wow. So it shows the people were eating matzah. And there's the word right there. They're eating matzah before Passover. Was it kind of like a little mini Passover? I don't know. It's definitely an interesting exodus, the exodus from Sodom. And here's what it says. They had not yet laid down when the townspeople, the men of Sodom, young and old, all the people to the last man gathered about the house. So this isn't just like a few people. This is like every guy. And they shouted to Lot and said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we may be intimate with them. Yeah. So that's the problem here. I mean, that's a big problem. Now, again, most people look at the story and say, oh, that's horrific. I mean, you should. It's like the worst kind of behavior you can have. Guests come to town and you rape them. And that's what it just said. Now, again, people focus on the fact that this seems to be a story of homosexuality. But they kind of miss the point. This isn't really homosexuality. This is rape. So a lot of people kind of are taken aback by this when they read this and they say, well, really a sodomite isn't a person who has sex with another man, a man who has sex with another man. It's somebody who rapes another man or rapes somebody. What's really a sodomite? It doesn't seem to be the fact that they're having sex, but that all the men of the town are saying, bring them out, put them out there so that we can know them. That's the word, which again is clearly meant to be taken with sexual.
Rabbi, I just studied the Judges, chapter 19.
Oh, you jumped the gun. We're going to look at that now. Oh. So you did look at it. What was the context, or what did you look at it for?
Because Rabbi Joseph Felsen, I think he's out of Palo Alto, but he was teaching at the Jewish Center, and now we're doing it on Zoom. And I'm just studying his class. He just reads to us. We got to Samson. So he was just talking about.
Yeah, well, it is right after the Samson story, right? So, right there, right? It goes, Jephthah and Samson, and these are horrible stories, the books of Judges. But we're going to see that right now. And again, you jumped the gun a little bit, but I'm glad you said it, because that's a good way of remembering it's Genesis chapter 19, because you have Genesis chapter 19 and Judges chapter 19. It's just a fluke. It's not like they had to be both chapter 19, but it's kind of weird that the story that we have in Genesis, and we're going to look at the Judges story, because most people have never seen the Judges story. Diane, had you seen the Judges story before?
No.
Yeah, it's not a story that we talk about in Hebrew school. We don't talk about this story. I mean, this story is hard to talk about in Hebrew school. I mean, you kind of have to, but like you have to change it. I mean, it's so weird. I mean, it's like, It's an important story in establishing who Abraham is. I mean, it's like, it's also a very dramatic story. It's really tough to teach kids. I mean, I don't remember how old I was when I first read the story, probably pretty young, but it's frightening. And it's also, it's a good question. I wonder what my child's Bible said about those Sodomites. I'm going to find it. Yeah, I'm going to find it. Oh, let me see if it's here. It is, I saw it recently because I was showing it to somebody on the screen. My child's Bibles. The child Bibles. But yeah, it's a troubling scene. But yeah, people usually miss the point. They see this as a condemnation of homosexuality, when in reality, it's the exact opposite of what Lot does. Lot brings out his guests to take care of them, wash their feet, feed them, what Abraham does. And here's the exact opposite. When a stranger comes to your town, you rape them. I mean, it's the polar opposite. It's literally the exact opposite. That is the way you always read the story of Sodom and Gomorrah when you just read Genesis. We're going to look at the Judges story in a second when we finish this. So Lot shut the door, shut them out at the entrance, shut the door behind them. So he brings the guys in and shuts the door. Okay. And he said, I beg you, my friends, do not commit such a wrong. And this is where the story gets even weirder, right? Because he says, look, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Let me bring them out to you, that you may know, let me do them as you please. But do not do anything to these men, since they have come under shelter of my roof. Well, that's not exactly the way you teach the story either to kids. I guarantee you that was not in my Bible. I'm looking for it because I actually really got to find it. It's really troubling. I mean, really, really troubling, because the good guy, the hero of the story, says, rape my daughters instead. Rape my virgin daughters instead. I mean, the whole thing is just so horrible. And it's a play on the intimacy. They have never known a man. Asher lo yadu ish. They haven't known a man. So they're virgins, and you can have them. I mean, insane. I mean, this is the world that Abraham was a part of, folks. But they said, stand back. The fellow came here as an alien, right? He's here as a guest, and he already acts the ruler. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. And they pressed hard against the person of Lot and moved forward to break the door. But the men stretched out their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. So the angels stretched out their hands. So there's a wonderful midrash image that, the angels just have these hands that elongate like, Mr. Stretch, and pull a Lot and bring him into the house and save him. And the people who are at the entrance of the house, young and old, they were struck with blinding light, so that they were helpless to find the entrance. So they can't find the entrance because, again, miraculously, magically, they're made blind by light.
They had lasers even then. Put lasers in their eyes.
Lasers, and the special effects in this are wonderful. Oh, they're just getting going. This is all special effects, this scene. This version is all special effects. Then the men said to Lot, whom else have you here? Sons-in-law, your sons and daughters, anyone else that you have in the city, bring them out of the place. So the angels say to him, get these rest of your family out of this place, for we are about to destroy this place. And notice how they keep calling it Hamakom. They don't call it the city. They don't call it Sodom. They call it this place. It's almost like we're not even going to say the name of this place. For we're about to destroy this place, because the outcry against them before the Lord has become so great that the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So the people are going to destroy the city, and it's proven to them that their people are bad. And what do? They save the only good people in the town. So there weren't 10 people. And God was going to save those innocent couple people. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law who had married his daughters and said, "Get up out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." But he seemed to his sons-in-law as one who jests. Now here's the weird thing. It said before that his daughters didn't know men, sorry.
But they were already married.
Yeah, but they're already married. So what's the possibility? They got married that night. That was the night they're getting married. That was their marriage. That was their wedding night. The two daughters were getting married that night. And this wedding party went crazy. So that's one possibility. They hadn't known anybody yet, but they'd gotten married and they were about to start their lives together. There's another possibility that Lot has more than two daughters, right? He's got a couple daughters who are married. He's got a couple daughters who aren't married. So there's a couple of possibilities here, which again, all of them we're about to see not great possibilities. But yeah, the son-in-laws don't buy it, which wouldn't surprise you if they're people from Sodom. As dawn broke, the angels urged Lot on, saying, "Up, take your wife and your two remaining daughters." So there it seems like they're different daughters. Again, it's possible. It could also be translated as your two daughters, who are now alone because the guys left them. But all these are possibilities. Again, none of it's good. Get up now. Let's go. Let's get out of here. And take your wife, your two daughters, and you'll be swept away. So either again, two different daughters, and there are two other daughters, or the daughters are now left by themselves. Still he delayed. So the men seized his hand in the hands of his wife and his two daughters in the Lord's mercy on him, and brought him out and left him outside the city. So again, seizing his hand in the hands of his wife and his two daughters. And again, it seems as though that like pulling them out is itself like a miracle, like their hands, are like magical, that they can pull for miles or whatever, they're angels, they can do these kind of miraculous things. When they had brought him outside, one said, "Flee for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the hills, lest you be swept away." So again, think about the special effects we're going to see in this scene. But Lot said to them, "Oh no, my lord, you have been so gracious to your servant, and have already shown me so much kindness in order to save my life, but I cannot flee to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and die. Look down there. Look, that town is near enough to flee to. It is such a little place. Let me flee there. It is such a little place, and let my life be saved." And again, the place is called a little place, Zoar. He replied, "Very well, I'll grant you this favor too. I will not annihilate the town of which you've spoken." So it seems as though this town of Zoar was supposed to be destroyed, but as they leave the city, like Lot says, "I can't live out in the hills. Don't put me out in the country. I'm used to living in the cities. Let me live in that little town over there. It's a little town, just such a little town." They say, we won't destroy that. We'll let you live in this little town. Hurry, flee there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. Hence the town was called Zoar. So this is a myth, a legend of how a town gets to be called Soar. Little town, little town. I'm from Little Town. Well, this is one of those towns of the area around Sodom and Gomorrah. Because again, it's not just Sodom that gets burned up. As the earth arose, as the sun rose upon the earth, Lot entered Zoar. The Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah sulfurous fire from the Lord out of heaven. He annihilated those cities and the entire plain, and all the inhabitants of the city and the vegetation of the ground. So this is an explanation for how the area around the Dead Sea became the Dead Sea. That whole area of the plain is called Hakikar. That whole area and all the cities around, right, they got destroyed, assumedly with the exception of Zoar, which got saved because of Lot. So it's an explanation for why there's like one little town left in that whole area. But all the vegetation died too. It's just like a complete annihilation. It's a miracle. And of course, there's one last miracle here. Lot's wife looked back, and she thereupon turned into a pillar of salt. And that's the famous myth of how Lot's wife became one of those pillars of salt that we see all around the Dead Sea, that we see these pillars. And we've seen them. When you go to the Dead Sea, you see these strange pillars that in some cases look like people. And so here's a story that one of them was Lot's wife, who couldn't really give up her life of the city. Folks, this is another example of stories in the Bible of how bad city life is. That city life is constantly being bombarded with sexuality, with lack of hospitality, with people in your business, with all of these problems that happen when people are in a city. The Bible definitely weighs in on not living in the city. In the very beginning, in the stories of Cain and Abel, they say, look, what did people lose by moving into the city? What happens to Abraham's own family when they move into the city? Because Lot, when we last left Lot, he was living as a herdsman, as a rival of Abraham. And he chose to live in that area, the area of the plains and the cities of the plain. And that becomes his undoing because he's drawn to that lifestyle. So first he's like living amongst those people as a herdsman in the area. And before you know it, he's living in town. So there really is a animosity and a bias against city living. So here's the story. And here's Abraham from Abraham's vantage point. Next morning, Abraham hurried to the place where he stood before the Lord. And looking down towards Sodom and Gomorrah and all the land of the plain, he saw the smoke of the land rising like the smoke of a kiln. That's a pretty graphic and visual image. As he looks out over the wasteland now of Sodom and Gomorrah and city of the plains, it looks like smoke coming out of a smokestack. That's a pretty tough visual, especially for Jews. You know? Watching an oven with fire, with smoke coming out of the top of the oven. Yeah. So this is a horrible image, and it's one the Bible preserves. And that's what happened when God destroyed the cities of the plain and annihilated the cities where Lot dwelled. God was mindful of Abraham and removed Lot from the midst of this upheaval. Lot went up from Zoar and settled in the hill country with his 2 daughters. For he was afraid to dwell in Zoar, and he and his 2 daughters lived in a cave. Now here's the postscript, the last 3 verses or so of this story, 4 verses, whatever. The story isn't over, because as much as the story, like the basis of the story, is the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, that's not really the whole point of it. You'll see why in a second. Well, you'll see 2 points of the story, because obviously it's a cautionary tale, but it's also another etymology. It's another story of how we get some other people. So what's interesting first about this part, though, that Lot lives in Zoar, but then it says he left Zoar and went up to the hill country with his daughters. And he lives in a cave. Now, what's interesting about this is that he goes into the city. He said he wanted to live in the city, but it says something interesting here, which he was afraid to live there. He was afraid. And so he chose to live in a cave instead, which is kind of amazing, but it shows you what happens when someone survives a trauma. I mean, this is almost textbook, PTSD, which is that he's afraid to be in any type of situation like this ever again. I don't want to live in a city. I thought I only liked to live in a city, but you know what? I'd rather live in a cave than live in a city, because God forbid, that this city is going to get destroyed, and everything that I thought, like everything I knew, is going to get burned up. I mean, assumedly, like either he lost 2 of his daughters already, he lost his wife for sure. I mean, he lost everything. He lost his home. So you can understand why he just can't live in a house anymore. I mean, it's like someone who survives a fire and is afraid to, be in the same kind of structure anymore. They sleep in that situation and they keep reliving it. So he goes and lives in the cave. Now, of course, here's what we see happens in this cave. The older one said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there's not a man on earth to consort with us in the way of the world. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and let us lie with him, so that we maintain life through our father." That night they made their father drink wine, and the older went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose. The next day the older one said to the younger, "See, I lay with father last night. Let us make him drink wine again tonight, and you will lie with him, and you will maintain life through our father." That night also they made their father drink wine, and the younger one went and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay or rose. Thus the daughters of Lot came to be with child by their father. The older one bore a son named Moab. He is the father of the Moabites today. And the younger one also bore a son. His name is Ben-Ami, and he is the father of the Ammonites today. And they lived happily ever after. Very disturbing story, folks. And not one that when we start the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, we ever want to get to that ending. And that's a horrible, horrible story. I mean, like on every level. Now, of course, part of the point of this story is to tell us that the Moabites and the Ammonites are the product of a weird incestual relationship between a father and daughter. I mean, literally, you cannot get lower on the totem pole of your genealogy than saying that your father was raped by his daughters, and that's your grandfather/father. It's a horrible story. And then again, it's a condemnation of the Moabites and Ammonites, who are enemies or rivals of the Jewish people later on. And so there you have it. Shouldn't be surprising that they're such weird people, because look who their ancestors were. I mean, this is the absolute like hillbilly nightmare, right? Honestly, I mean, this is literally like the weird kind of how can you make somebody's origin story worse than this? So, yeah, it's not just the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's not just a story of rape, near rape. It ends with a molestation and a rape, if you will, of a father perpetrated by his daughters. Notice, by the way, the use of alcohol in this story that's reminiscent of Noah. So there's a few elements here that kind of go back to Noah. A destruction story, a post flood, where Noah's uncovered, his nakedness is uncovered. Here you have a father that's literally raped by his offspring. It's a really troubling story. So now that we've read Genesis chapter 19, we're going to make a very quick jump, as Diane said, to a story that most people never read. They definitely don't read it in Hebrew school. And it's in the book of Judges, that period of time between Joshua, Jews living in the land of Israel now, but before they had a king. And in case you didn't know they didn't have a king, many chapters or beginnings of stories in the book of Judges begin with these words: in those days when there was no king in Israel. So there was no king yet. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, here it doesn't seem, in the stories in Judges, it doesn't seem to be a good thing. But it does remind us when this takes place. And it says a Levite was residing at the other end of the hill country of Ephraim. Well, again, at the other end, it means like at one end, at one extreme of the hill country of Ephraim. And he took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. So a couple different tribes are involved here. A few different tribes. A Levite who's living in Ephraim, who takes a concubine from Judah. So all the big tribes are involved in this story, right? Levites, the priestly tribe, Ephraim, the biggest tribe in the north, and Judah, the biggest tribe in the south. So this is like, something big is going to happen here. Well, yeah. Once his concubine deserted him, leaving him for her father's house in Bethlehem in Judah. And she stayed there for full 4 months. So concubine goes home. The husband set out with an attendant and a pair of donkeys and went after her to woo her and to win her back. So even though she's not really his wife, it says she's a Pelegesh, that she's a concubine, but she still has the right, I guess, not to be with him, right? It's not a slave. So she admitted him into her father's house, and when the girl's father saw him, he received him warmly. His father-in-law, the girl's father, pressed him, and he stayed with him 3 days, and they ate and drank and lodged there. Seems like this is going to be a nice story of reconciliation. Early in the morning, on the 4th day, he started to leave, but the girl's father said to the son-in-law, "Eat something to give you strength, then you can leave." So the two of them sat down and they feasted together. Then the girl's father said to the man, "Won't you stay overnight and enjoy yourself?" The man started to leave, but his father-in-law kept urging him until he turned back and spent the night there. Early in the morning of the 5th day, he was about to leave when the girl's father said, "Come have a bite." The two of them ate, dawdling until past noon. Then the man, his concubine, and his attendant started to leave. His father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, "Look, the day is waning toward evening. Do stop for the night. See, the day is declining. Spend the night here and enjoy yourself. You can start early on your journey and head from home." But the man refused to stay for the night. So he'd stayed there a bunch of days already. He felt like, got to get home already. He's staying with his father-in-law. But what does he do? He set out and traveled as far as the vicinity of Yebus, which is Jerusalem, Jebusite city, right? It had not been made the capital of Israel yet, or of Judah. He had with him a pair of laden donkeys, and his concubine was with him. Since they were close to Yebus, and the day was very far spent, so it was almost nighttime. The attendant said to his master, "Let us turn into this town of Jebusites and spend the night in it." But his master said to him, "We will not turn aside into a town of aliens who are not of Israel, but we will continue to Gibeah, right, which is the Benjaminite town." So they could have gone into Jerusalem, which is a Canaanite town at that time. And the guy says, "I'm not going to go there. That's a town it's not Israelite. I don't want to go to my Israelites. I want to go with my people. So I'm going to go to the Gibeah, which is in the tribe of Benjamin." I'm going to stay with other Israelites. Come, he said to the attendant, let us approach one of those places and spend the night either in Giv'ah or Ramah. So they traveled on, and the sun set when they were near Gibeah of Benjamin. And Giv'ah means like the heights. It's like a mountain top. It's a mountain settlement, if you will, mountain village. And this is in particular, there was Givot in a lot of places. This was Giv'ah Benjamin. They turned off and spent the night in Giv'ah. And he went and sat down in the town square, but nobody took them indoors to spend the night. Sounds familiar. Town square. In the evening, an old man came along from his property outside the town. The man hailed from the hill country of Ephraim and resided in Giv'ah, where the townspeople were Benjaminites. So this is another guy from the hill country of Ephraim. So maybe they're from the same, they lived in the same area. So maybe they have a little commonality. But he lives with the Benjaminites. So again, he lives a little further south than where his tribe is. He happened to see the wayfarer in the town square, and he said, where, the old man inquired, are you going? Where did you come from? He replied, we're traveling from Bethlehem in Judah to the other end of the hill country of Ephraim. That's where I live. I've made a journey to Bethlehem of Judah, and now I'm on my way to the house of the Lord, and nobody's taken me out indoors. We have both bruised straw and feed for our donkeys, and bread for me and your handmaid, and for the attendant with your servants. We lack nothing. Rest easy, said the old man. Let me take care of your needs. Do not on any account spend the night in the square. Same thing. Don't stay overnight in the outside in the public sphere. Come into my house. And he took them into the house. He mixed fodder for the donkeys and then bathed their feet and ate and drank. Same thing, bathing feet, all hospitality. While they were enjoying themselves, the men of the town, a depraved lot, had gathered about the house and were pounding on the door. They called to the aged owner of the house, bring out that man who's coming to your house so that we may be intimate with him. The same words. They banged on the door, men of the town. The owner of the house went out and said to him, please, my friends, do not commit such a wrong. Since this man has entered my house, do not perpetrate this outrage. Same scene. The master of the house says, don't do it. Don't do it. You think the similarity ends there? Look, here's my virgin daughter and his concubine. Let me bring them out to you. You can have your pleasure with them. Do with them what you like, but don't do this outrageous thing to this man. Wow. Again, this is horrible. Take the two women. Take the two women. But the men would not listen to him. So the man seized his concubine and pushed her out to them. They raped her and abused her all night long until morning, and they let her go when dawn broke. Now, that's where the story deviates from the Sodom and Gomorrah story. There is no God to step in. There are no angels now to step in.
Honey.
Okay? Nothing to save this woman. Now, only one of the girls goes out or is taken out, the concubine. Toward the morning, the woman came back. And it was growing light, and she collapsed at the entrance of the man's house where her husband was. When her husband arose in the morning, he opened the doors of the house and went out to continue his journey, and there was the woman, his concubine, lying at the entrance of the house with her hands on the threshold. Get up, he said to her, let us go. But there was no reply. So the man placed her on the donkey and set out for home. Now, I mean, it's a horrific story. Horrific, right? I mean, it's a horrific story. There is no angel to protect this woman. But it's horrific because her own husband doesn't seem to care. I mean, I mean, you just read the story. I mean, look what happens here. He doesn't, I mean, he seems like he's going to go on and just like it happened, you know? First of all, it doesn't even seem like he cares whether he finds her or not. Because it says he opened the door to continue the journey, and there was the woman. Like, you know, and she's holding on to the doorway. And like, it's horrible. It's like a horrible story. But Diane, you just read this story. It gets worse.
I know.
This story gets worse.
Absolutely. It's terrible.
Now, you know, we talk a lot about stories of the Bible that are not suitable for children's reading. You know, this one, I mean, I don't even know where you put it. Like, at what age do you let somebody read? I don't want you to read this story, but we got to, because you got to understand the context for Sodom and Gomorrah. When he came home, he picked up a knife and took hold of his concubine and cut her up limb from limb into 12 parts. He sent them throughout the territory of Israel. And everyone who saw it cried out, never has such a thing happened or been seen from the day the Israelites came out of the land of Egypt to this day. Put your mind to this, take counsel, and decide. Holy moly. Now, I mean, as horrible as it is, you can say, well, at least nothing like that had happened in hundreds of years. But it's horrible. I mean, this is really, really bad. And like, who told this guy that this is the way you're going to demand justice, by cutting her up into 12 pieces and send one to each of the tribes?
What lesson is this teaching us?
Well,
I don't know.
Now you understand what the Sodom and Gomorrah story is. It's a cautionary tale to tell the Jews never to become like this.
Oh, okay.
And so everybody focuses on, well, I'm going to tell you, here's where they focus on the story wrong. They focus on the story wrong first because they think it's a story about homosexuality. You're looking at the wrong place. Then you think it's a story about rape and, you know, what happens in a horrible town, like what shouldn't happen, like how you shouldn't live, like what's wrong with cities, inhospitable, rape, no law and order. So that's first wrong. Then you think it's over here, but it's not there at all. What it really is telling us is that there was a story that happened to the Jewish people, which was so horrible that you're almost like you can't believe such a thing would happen. And it's there, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is actually there to teach us that this type of behavior, you should be wiped out. There's no passing go. You don't come back from this.
Pure evil, evil.
Yeah. And they were saying that this is look, here's what I think. I think Sodom and Gomorrah, the legends of Sodom and Gomorrah were real. Whether it really happened, how it happened, the stories of the destruction of the cities that lived in that area. Let's look at it from the standpoint of like what happens with people. Maybe hundreds of years before the time of the Bible, there were legends. There was a real community. We know it. I told you last week. Archaeologically, we have the evidence that there were people living in that area. There were horrible earthquakes, catastrophes, volcanoes, natural disasters, rain from heaven, whatever you want to say, wiped those areas out. They became a no man's land. They literally became completely uninhabitable. The Jewish people knew that. And what they said was by writing that story of Sodom and Gomorrah, they were actually teaching us that when this story happened in the time of Judges, that literally God would have said, let us wipe out these people.
Mhm.
We have now become like the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. That's the point of the story. When you do this, you are like the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, which were deserving of complete destruction. So I believe that this story of the concubine who got murdered, raped, murdered, and then cut up happened. It was a real story. People knew it. The names weren't changed to protect the innocent. They didn't have the names because they didn't want people to talk about the actual people in the story, because it's all bad. There's no heroes in this story. So we don't have their names. We don't have their names. Bible has names for everybody. Not everybody, but Bible could have had names. No names. Now, what happened afterwards, this isn't the end of the story, because what it says, we're not going to read the whole story. It says all the Israelites from Dan to Beersheba marched up. So every Israelite tribe gathered together, 400,000 people gathered together, and they came to Mitzpah. And the Benjaminites, the tribe of the Benjaminites, heard what happened. And the Israelites said, how did this evil thing happen? And the Levite, the husband of the murdered woman, said, my concubine and I came to Gibeah to spend the night. The citizens of Gibeah set out to harm me. They gathered against me. They meant to kill me, and they ravished my concubine until she died. So I took hold of my concubine, I cut her to pieces. For an outrageous act of depravity had been committed in Israel. Now you are all Israelites. Produce a plan of action here and now. So he says to them, what are you going to do to fix this? And all the people rose as one man and declared, we will not go back to our homes. We will not enter our houses. But this is what we will do to Gibeah. We will wage war against it according to lot. We will take from all the tribes of Israel 10 men to 100, 100 to 1,000, 1,000 to 10,000 to provide provisions. And we are going to go there. So all the men of Israel united as one man and amassed against the town. And the tribe of Israel sent men throughout the whole tribe of Benjamin, saying, what is this evil thing that has happened among you? Come hand over those scoundrels of Givah, so that we may put them to death. But the Benjaminites would not yield to the man of the Israelites. So the Benjaminites gathered from their towns in Givah in order to take field against the Israelites. On that day, Benjaminites mustered from their towns 26,000 men, and it says right here, 700 picked men. The men of Israel, other than Benjamin, mustered 400,000 men, warriors to a man. It's basically like 27,000 people against 400,000 people. Now, you can guess, we're not going to read the whole story, but you can guess that 400,000 people against 27,000 people, it's not going to be good for those people. But here's the deal. They do eventually, the Givites and the Benjaminites end up being routed, but not before they kill literally tens of thousands of Israelites. And so eventually the people of Givah, the Benjaminites, they get murdered. They're wiped out. So it's a horrible story, because it's the story of the Israelites going to war against one of their own tribes. The Benjaminites are almost completely wiped out, almost obliterated because of this. And so it's not a story of God acting in vengeance, but it's a story of like a civil war amongst the Israelites. And it's a horrible story. And so the context of Sodom and Gomorrah is really to establish why the story in Judges, like, why was it, like, it's so bad that it's almost like, for them in the time of Judges, it was biblical, and they were biblical times, but they were like, no, there's biblical and then there's biblical. And they're basically saying that when they destroyed the towns of Givah, they're acting like God, demanding vengeance on these evil people. So this is what's so amazing about this story, in Judges is that it is an account of something that happened more recently in Jewish history, and they are literally linking it to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, more from the standpoint of like this is on a mythological level how evil the town of Giv'ah was. So, look, it's a horrible story.
Yes.
And what's so horrible about it is that there's like a kernel of, like they told this story, the Sodom and Gomorrah story, which is a bad story on its own, is actually really there to explain the story of Judges, which was like unfortunately, like a true crime story. So that's the problem here, folks, is that this is it's one of the worst stories in the Bible. So you think the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is bad. Oh, it's bad. But the weird thing is that it actually it's actually hiding, or not hiding because it's there in the Bible. It's actually there to explain a much worse story. It's not there to be read by itself. It has to be linked to the story in Judges. And again, most people don't even know the story, which is why we just took a little time looking at it. Because a lot of people don't know that story. And there's a reason. I mean, it's just a horrible story. I mean, you can't really process it. It sounds just like the worst thing you've heard. I mean, it's one of those things that you just go, that's horrific in any age. And unfortunately, again, it's kind of like, it was almost like the final straw. In the book of Judges, you read that story and then you go, oh, we got to have a king. We're not supposed to have a king, but like, we got to figure out some way of stopping this stuff from happening, because people aren't, there's no law and order. And it's getting so bad that the tribes are turning on each other. So we got to fix this. So that's kind of like the last straw in the book of Judges. It's kind of like, oh, we need another system. So it kind of like explains why we have kings, the books of Judges. Kind of tells you if we don't have a king, we're going to keep having horrible things like that happen. So let's turn back to Vayera. So again, we haven't had a chance to read that story in a long time. And again, the purpose of kind of like the Sodom and Gomorrah story, really, if anything, is to remind us of the Judges story, and then to kick this little in here, to kick down the Moabites and the Ammonites, and to give us a little backstory of how these people come into the world, which is a really bad story of incest. But again, compared to the other story, this is that's a really bad story. All right, so we're going to read one last section here of Vayera, which is the part we didn't read. We referred to it when we read Birth of Isaac a couple of weeks ago. We read chapter 21 back in October, or September, I should say, end of September. But we'll read chapter 20. And so here's what happens after Sodom and Gomorrah. Avraham journeyed from there to the region of the Negev, which is in the south, and settled between Kadesh and Shur. While he was sojourning in Gerar, which is an area in the south, Avraham said of his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." So Avimelech, king of Gerar, had Sarah brought to him. But God came to Avimelech in a dream by night and said to him, "You are to die because of the woman that you have taken, for she is a married woman." Now, Avimelech had not approached her. He said, "O Lord, will you slay people even though innocent?" Sounds a little bit like Avraham. Will you slay the righteous? A right person who hasn't done anything wrong. I would translate it that way. What's so weird about this, of course, is we read last week the same thing with Egyptians, where Avraham pretends that Sarah is his sister. By the way, we have an incident with another Avimelech, or the same Avimelech, with Isaac and Rebekah. So this isn't the end of this story. This is the second version of this story, this pattern, if you will. Again, it could be that this is another version of this kind of story, version of the story of Sarah. Like there's two versions of the story by two authors. I don't want to dwell on it, but if you read the first version, the Pharaoh version, it is a little different, and it is got the word Lord, but the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his household with mighty plagues. I mean, that very much sounds like the plague, like a reference to the plagues of during the time of Moses. This one has a little different feeling to it. Sorry. Went back to that chapter. So he himself said to me, she is my sister. And she also said, he is my brother. Why I did this, my heart was blameless. When I did it, my hands are clean. And God said to him in a dream, I knew that you did this with a blameless heart. So I kept you from sinning against me. That was why I did not let you touch her. Therefore, restore the man's wife, since he is a prophet. And that's the word that they use, a prophet, a navi. He will intercede for you to save your life. If you fail to restore her, know that you shall die, you and all that is yours, all yours. Early the next morning, Avimelech called his servants and told them all that had happened, and the men were greatly frightened. Then Avimelech summoned Abraham and said to him, what have you done to us? What wrong have I done to you that you should bring such a guilt upon me and my kingdom? You have done to me things that ought not to be done. So Avimelech seems like he's saying, Abraham, you tricked me. Why did you trick me? What then, Avimelech demanded of Abraham, what was your purpose in doing this thing, right? I thought, said Abraham, surely there is no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. So his answer is similar to the other version of this story, which is, I thought you'd kill me. Now, given the story we just read in the previous chapter of Sodom and Gomorrah, all of this pretending that your wife is your sister doesn't seem so silly now, does it? Right? It doesn't seem like, again, you can necessarily look at these guys like they're a bunch of idiots or fools or worse than that, men of low character of Abraham and then Isaac doing this. They're trying to survive, and they're not living in a very safe environment. And so again, you can't really fault Abraham. He knows what just happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. And here's the line. And besides, she is in truth my sister, for my father's daughter, though not my mother's, and she became my wife. So she's my half sister. Not exactly what you wanted to hear about Sarah, but here you have that line, at least in this version of the story. So when God made me wander from my father's house, I said to her, let this be the kindness that you shall do for me. Whatever place we come to, say there of me, he is my brother. So here in this version of the story, you have now a setup that this has happened before. So that's why this version of the story is kind of open-ended in the sense that it could have happened before. So Avimelech took sheep and oxen and male and female slaves and gave them to Abraham, and he restored his wife Sarah to him. So again, the motif is similar in that Abraham gets things from that, including male and female slaves. And Avimelech said, here my land is before you, settle wherever you please. So he not only gives them property and things, but he says, go live wherever you want. Now, Abraham, this is Abraham's land. God told him it was his land, but could he really live anywhere in safety and security? So now this guy, Abimelech, says, you can live wherever you want. And to Sarah, he said, I herewith give you your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. This will serve as a vindication before all who are with you, and you are cleared before everyone. Wow. So there's also monetary compensation for you, and to make sure that if anybody ever does this to you, you know, you're nobody, you know, you don't know any, you know, this again, I want to make sure it never happens, essentially. Or if it does happen, I'm prepaying for any other idiots who do this to you. I mean, seriously, that's what it says. Abraham then prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his slave girls so that they bore children. So here's the weird thing. It says that they couldn't have kids while this was going on. The Lord had closed fast every womb of the household of Abimelech because of Sarah, the wife of Abraham. Now, what is so weird about that last line? Sarah couldn't have kids. And here, other people couldn't have kids because of her. What a weird measure for measure. Such a kind of a interesting, I want to say irony. It's not really irony, but I don't know what the right word is. It's kind of a, that's not really coincidence either. It's a setup for what we get to in chapter 21, which is the next line. And we're going to finish here because we read this before, just a few weeks ago. The Lord took note of Sarah and did for Sarah as he had spoken. She conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken. So her ability to procreate becomes real. It's not just theoretical. It's not just a promise. Now she gets to have kids after all this. And again, you know, the rabbis point out, if she's 90 years old and she's still that attractive, what a wonderful thing. That's such a beautiful thing, that she was so beautiful that even Abimelech couldn't keep his hands off of her. Well, she's obviously a beautiful woman. Now, we're going to finish off here, but now you understand when it says, Abraham gave his newborn son, whom Sarah had borne him, the name Isaac. And again, it says that he's circumcised. You can understand why Abraham, this idea that Abraham was Isaac's father, we need to know he is Isaac's father. Because we just read a previous story that Sarah was living with another guy for a period of time. So when we read that, you know, Abraham is Isaac's father, now you know why. Yeah.
Doesn't the name Itzhak mean laughter?
Yeah.
That's what we were talking about earlier this evening, too.
Yeah.
I think that's what you're trying to bring together.
Yeah. So it says right here, he gave him the name Isaac, right? Which we say is laughter. And here, by the way, I'll just show you. It says, Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born to him. So again, why does it say he was born to him? Because, of course, he was born to his mother, but he was born to him. It's his son. And then Sarah said, God has brought me laughter. Everyone who hears will laugh with me, not at me, but with me. And that's the play on his name, Isaac, right? Vatomer Sarah Sahokasa, that I will, people will laugh with me. Now, again, as we talked about 3 verses later, child grew up, he was weaned, and they had a great feast for him on the day that Isaac was weaned. Assume he's like a 3-year-old, 4-year-old kid. And it says, Vatera, Vatere Sarah et Ben Hagar. Sarah saw Hagar the Egyptian, the son of Hagar, was Metzachek, was playing with the boy Ishmael. It doesn't call him Ishmael here, but says he was Metzachek. He was playing with Isaac. And that makes her go crazy. Cast out the slave woman and her son. So what was it? It seems like he's just playing with him. Now, the rabbis interpret this in many different ways. There's lots of possibilities, which again, one of them is she just didn't like him now anymore. She didn't like those people around the house anymore because they have a son and she doesn't need this guy anymore. I don't need this son, this fake son. It's not my son. There's also the possibility that he's roughhousing with the boy. She doesn't need to have a teenager roughhousing with her little son. And not only that, he ain't roughhousing. If he gets rid of Isaac, he gets all the inheritance. He's got no reason to want Isaac to live. So she's maybe thinking about his safety, which then gets to another issue, which is that when it says that he's playing with him, that he's actually molesting him. That was another possibility that was offered. That when he was playing with him, he was actually playing with him and sexually molesting him. So all of those are offered up as possibilities for why Sarah says, get them out of this house. They're all possibilities. But it's the second time that Sarah has said, get this woman out of my house. So that motif actually repeats too. So a lot of the stories of Abraham and Sarah are repeated. There's different versions of them. Again, they're either written by different authors or repeated for emphasis. Deja vu all over again, right? As Yogi Berra said, deja vu. It is the strange mark of these stories that you have a lot of deja vu. And as we saw today, the big deja vu, of course, is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah and Judges chapter 19. So again, I'm glad we could take that little digression, that little journey into the book of Judges. I wish we didn't have that story in the Bible. I think the first time I finally read that story, I think I was in college when I finally read that story. And I said to myself, I had no idea this was in the Bible. I wish I didn't ever have to read that story. I wish it was not in the Bible. It's up there. If it's not the most disturbing thing, it's one of the most disturbing things in the Bible. And so when we talk about the Bible having makes you laugh and cry and think and in some cases just obliterates your ability to comprehend human behavior right there. So yeah, we have to learn from the horrible too, but that's really horrible, really a horrible story. But again, it should be the worst thing that we ever hear. But we're reading a story that happened 3,000 years ago, which thank God, and I will say this, because of our values and because of who we are as a Jewish people, it still horrifies us. So thank God for that. Thank God it still makes us sick when we read that story. And by any standards of human decency, thank God we created a world of the Jewish people, and then again through Christianity and Islam and all different kinds of faiths and systems that were based on our Hebrew Bible. Thank God those kinds of behaviors were seen as abhorrent and the worst. So thank God that's the world we live in. All right, everybody, stay healthy and we look forward to seeing you on Shabbos and next Tuesday or Wednesday.
Thank you.
Tuesday.
Don't forget, we have trivia. It's Jewish trivia, by the way. I do want to say it's Jewish trivia. So some of you have signed up, some of you haven't. It's not ridiculously difficult. I want to tell you, you have it. Don't think that this is trivia that you can't compete in. It is, we have about.
We should all know it. We've been, studying with you for years.
I will tell you that Kelly Wasserman helped put it together. It is, I'm going to tell you how many people we have signed up as of now. We've got about 16, 17 people signed up. So, yeah, please get on that because.
Hey, is my neighbor coming?
No,
Rich?
no, he knows like sports. No, we have somebody named.
He did bingo.
Hewon Lee. We have Hewon Lee. No, but we have Scott Boltz is doing it from Vegas. Doreen is doing it. People who did couple people who did bingo. Judith is doing it. Judith will be pretty good. She knows her stuff. Yeah, we got about 16, 17 people that are doing it. I mean, I didn't go through all the names. I went through the names of people that.
As long as Ronnie's not doing it, because he'd win hands down.
Ronnie's not doing it though. He might be back in town, but he's back in town pretty soon.
Should be.
I talked to him the other day. They're doing okay. All right, everybody. Again, please get some rest. I'm going to try to get some rest tonight. I honestly slept for 15 minutes between 2:30 and 2:45. I think I caught. I seem to recall looking up and going, "Oh, it's 15 minutes later." So I think at some point my eyes closed for a few minutes. All right, everybody, stay healthy.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks,
bye.